Hello and welcome to the Unit 2 pre-recorded virtual review for tort law. So what's on this exam? There's 25 multiple choice questions covering Chapter 7 and the supplemental insurance material. You'll have 30 minutes to complete the exam through As You Learn. And again, please review all policies related to academic integrity. If you have any issues during the exam, please make sure that you have my phone number handy in case you need it. So we're going to talk about tort law, and remember that acronym SIN, sin. Remember, tort means civil wrong, wrong, sin. So hopefully that correlation will help you remember the acronym of the three different types of tort law. We've got strict liability for S, I is intentional tort, and N is negligence. First one that I want to quickly review is strict liability. Now, when we talked about strict liability, we said that we don't look at the duty of care that you took or the duty that was owed. We look to see did the harm occur as a result of, you having this abnormally dangerous animal or engaging in this abnormally dangerous activity. As a result of that, we just kind of bypass some of those earlier elements of negligence. Product liability also falls into that strict liability category. So be sure to review that particular tort. Remember that product liability has a lot of crossover and intersect between negligence. So make sure you have a strong foundation in negligence before you try and understand product liability. And we're going to talk more about that during the live session. So intentional torts. I want to point you to one resource that's on As You Learn that will help you with intentional torts. All right, if you look under the Unit 2 material, you'll see something called a resource, Intentional Torts Handout. When you pull up that document, it will kind of give you a rundown of the elements of a tort. I think your primary focus is going to be, okay, what constitutes a battery, an assault? What does false imprisonment look like? Intentional infliction of emotional distress, trespass to land, etc. I would say that the McGraw-Hill optional activities are really great resources for checking your understanding of the differences between those torts and when you see those two torts together, or when you see multiple torts together. This intentional torts defenses is represented in POPCANs as the acronym. And POPCANs is just what we use to remember the different torts defenses that are available. So POPCAN stands for privilege, and we primarily see privilege used with things like defamation claims. If I, as a prosecutor, bring a cause of action against, the defendant, in a criminal trial, I'm accusing them of doing something. And so I can utilize my absolute privilege in that scenario. Defense to others, kind of goes along with self-defense and applies to primarily some of those, like battery and assault type, or physical torts. Defense to property, obviously one that goes along with all of the torts. Consent, we talked a lot about consent when I talked about the Pitocin, the lady who was pregnant who ended up with Pitocin. And then authority and necessity, again, are things that you probably won't see too much on the exam, but, did I need to trespass onto your property in order to put out the fire so that it didn't burn my house down as well? Negligence. Negligence, you're going to want to make sure you spend some time in and make sure you fully understand. You should be able to rattle off the elements of a negligence claim. Duty owed, duty breached, causation, damages. Causation comes in two parts. We've got actual causation, and we've got proximate causation, or actual causation also stands for cause and fact causation, or the but-for test. All three of those terms fit in with that cause and fact. And then proximate causation, damages, and then defenses. And remember, our defenses for negligence are different than our defenses for intentional torts. So remember, POPCANs are the defenses for intentional torts, but our defenses for negligence are things like contributory negligence, comparative negligence, assumption of risk, those types of things. So remember, when we're looking at negligence, we're more or less trying to say, how much did you as the defendant contribute to this loss so that we can reduce the amount that I'm liable for this, or if I'm liable at all. So definitely pay some attention to negligence. I would say the hanging point for students is, one, knowing those elements, but then knowing what those elements mean, particularly duty owed and duty breached. Remember, we don't generally owe a duty an affirmative duty to do a lot of things. So you have to think, okay, in this scenario, what did they owe a duty to do? What was their responsibility here? In a car accident, what's the responsibility of the person who crashes into the other person? Well, it's probably to pay attention to the road, adhere to the, the laws of the road, etc., depending on what caused the accident, not run red lights. In a slip and fall case, we may look to say, okay, I went to Target, I slipped and fell on something that wasn't properly marked, or, had an uneven lip in the pavement, and, they didn't properly mark that. What was Target's duty owed? What was the obligation that they owed to people coming onto their property? So, you had to think through what the duty owed is to know what the duty breached is. And then we get into more of the technical components. Okay, cause and fact. We asked ourselves, but for, Target not doing X, would the injury have occurred? And if the answer is no, then we've met that test. If the answer is yes, then we have to ask that substantial factor test, and that's a substantial factor question. And that's where we start to get into things, related to me shooting someone's shoulder, and both of us are out in the woods shooting the same shoulder. Whose fault is it if both of us did it? And so substantial factor test. So we've got cause and fact. And then we've got proximate causation. Be careful with proximate causation, because people tend to think of it a little bit more than they need to. So proximate causation is really just asking, is this foreseeable? Did you see something like this coming as a result of your actions? If you don't clean up a wet spot in a commercial facility, then it's pretty foreseeable that if a customer walks down that aisle, that they will probably slip and fall. So, we look at foreseeability. And then damages. Okay, what are the damages? That's where we start talking about compensatory damages, general damages, special damages, punitive damages, and stuff like that. And just because you've played out one side of the story, don't forget about the other side when we're talking about defenses, because sometimes the facts and the real analysis comes in the defenses. So here in negligence, contributory negligence, comparative negligence, depending on what type of jurisdiction we're in. Assumption of risk, we're going to play out in almost every jurisdiction. Did they assume a certain risk when they were engaging in that type of activity? Don't neglect these two doctrines. Students often forget about them, and then when they see them on the exam, they're like, oh, what is this? Res ipsa loquitur, the thing that speaks for itself, allows us to bypass some of those elements of negligence and get straight to damages. If I'm in my classic example is of the person in surgery whose arm falls off the table and then ends up losing, ends up with severe neuropathy issues because they didn't leave her arm on the table and properly secure her on the table. There's nothing that she did that contributed to that loss. So that res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself. The loss itself speaks for itself that someone is responsible for that. Negligence per se is basically as a result of breaking a law. Now, from a real technical perspective, you'd want to look at the law to see if negligence per se is excluded as applicable. But generally, for your purposes, if you see somebody violating a statute, let that serve as kind of a red flag to say, okay, does this negligence per se apply? All right, and as far as the insurance components and things that you'll need to know from there, be sure to check out some of these video resources and to watch your supplemental videos, of course, but then just to take notes from the supplemental reading assignment that I gave, the supplemental resource here, the insurance study guide, and know things that are listed on that brain dump, like subrogation, premium, insurable interest, stuff like that. So that one's going to be that's going to be fairly high level. I wouldn't spend a ton of time studying that aspect of the exam, but it does take up 3 or 4 questions. So it would be worth making sure that you understand those terms. And that's all I have for today. Please be sure to join me for the live virtual review on Friday.